As a kid I played many video games. Nothing exceptional, and I do not even want to pretend that it is. Well, the habit is still going strong to this day, even though my attitude towards the modern gaming industry is souring. But who cares? We have so many more games to play and replay from past generations. It is never too late to explore the seemingly endless catalog of games from years ago that anyone can have a field trip and find a hidden gem with. Or rediscover games they loved as a kid. And this is exactly what this video series is about. As a kid I played games on various different systems. My PlayStation, Super Nintendo, PlayStation Portable, and of course my PC. I even experienced my very first exposure to game emulation through a CD which contained hundreds of game ROMs, those ROMs being arcade classics. Some of these ROMs I played once and never again, others I would boot up a bit more regularly. But young me played one game every single day. That game being
Metal Slug!
At the time I was rather good at the game. If my memory is not failing me, which it might, I was able to beat the first game with only 1 or 2 continues. But now, after roughly 10 years of on and off play sessions, my skills have regressed significantly. Metal Slug is a Contra-like of sorts. I would not know if this is a fair category though, since I never played Contra. It definitely is a good run and gun though. What about Metal Slug made me replay the game over and over again? Our family computer was rather old. I think it was a Windows XP machine. Before that, it had the Windows 98 operating system running on it. Again, old hardware. I did not have many games to choose from on the computer. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Tomb Raider 4, which I never was able to beat. Newgrounds Flash games my parents definitely would not have allowed me to play, and the before mentioned emulation disc. Metal Slug stands out for 2 reasons. It looks cool, and it's a simple game at heart. That's it? Yeah, that's it. Do you expect Kid Me to elaborate what design aspects made the game rewarding and exceptional? I did not even know what an arcade was back in the day. One time, we had a chair circle something in elementary school, and the teacher asked us kids, "What games do you play at home?" So everyone answered. The girls typically played with dolls, and the boys of course played video games, collected Action Man figures, and beat each other up at home. Of course they did not tell the last part to the teacher. Kids are a bit more intelligent than that. Not too much. Just a little bit. So I answered with, "There's this game I play and it's about midgets and they shoot each other and they are in the army and they throw bombs and they get in tanks and they shoot each other." "Well, that sounds violent." And that was that. To this day, I am not sure if a teacher ever asked my parents about this game. All in all, I really enjoyed Metal Slug. The easy controls and amazing visuals coupled with the iconic sounds kept me playing for hours and hours every single day. Now I am 20 years old, far less cuter, and hopefully somewhat more intelligent than I was as a kid. A lot of things changed, but some things will always stay the same. I still like Metal Slug. Only difference is, now I know exactly why I do. Metal Slug appeals to me now partly for its amazing, simple but punishing gameplay, and consistent audio-visual identity. No matter what Metal Slug game you boot up, you just know it is Metal Slug. As a kid I only played Metal Slug 1 and 2, and never knew any more games in the series even existed. Later on I discovered the existence of Metal Slug 3, and even later I realized just how many games exist in the series. Metal Slug 1, 2, X, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Double X, a 3D game of a franchise which is odd, and a couple more spin-off titles which are not worth really looking at. This video is focused on Metal Slug 1 through Double X, since the mainline titles interest me the most. When looking at the games in general, there is not really much to describe in terms of gameplay. Metal Slug is mechanically simple. You shoot things dead, and you try to not get hit dead. Most games control by only using one joystick and 3 buttons. That's it. One button is used for shooting, another for throwing bombs, and the third one for jumping. Our heroes and heroines can find and equip a varied arsenal of weaponry, and they can even mount a variety of vehicles named slugs, the most iconic vehicle being the Metal Slug, being the cute squishy looking tank that is present in every Metal Slug title. Many titles in the series also have a popular animal slug, the camel and ostrich slugs for instance. No matter what character you pick, you always die in one single shot, except when you mount a certain vehicle. Animal slugs cannot be killed, but you can get shot off the animal you mounted. Actual vehicles have a life bar and take multiple hits to be destroyed. Those slugs can be repaired by picking up fuel that sometimes is dropped in certain places. Metal Slug is an arcade game designed to kill you, so it is a very hard experience. But with enough repetition, memorization, and skill, you can become much better at the game without using as many continues to progress. The fun actually comes from replaying. Metal Slug is all about besting a challenge as best as you can, depending on how good you are. Metal Slug games can be completed anywhere between 20 minutes to 1.5 hours. Some games, especially Metal Slug 3, are also much longer and way more sadistic than other entries in the series. Metal Slug is an arcade game at heart, so what makes the game rewarding is racking up points and trying to not use too many continues. Points are accumulated by killing enemies, picking up items, and freeing prisoners of war. If you manage to stay alive up until the end of a mission, all the POWs you saved and the slugs you brought to the end of a mission will increase the high score by a significant amount through bonus points. The games can be played very nicely on keyboards, controllers, and arcade sticks. For me personally, playing any Metal Slug game with an arcade stick is overall just a better experience. Before we take apart the games one by one, let us look at the generic enemies a Metal Slug squad faces in almost every single title. The iconic infantrymen are part of the rebel army that are led by General Molten, the main antagonist of many Metal Slug titles. As a kid, I always thought that the rebels were supposed to represent, and I still do. The visual design of the troops is very reminiscent of the German uniforms back in the day. The shape of the helmet and uniform of the average rebel is aesthetically very close to the uniforms we had during the Second World War. Only difference is that the uniforms are green instead of black. The rebels' flag also resembles the flag of the Third. The colors are kept to red, white, and black, but instead of depicting the center of the flag, a cross takes its place. In many games, Nazi weaponry and symbolism is used to signal who an enemy is. The same is true for Metal Slug. With that being said, let us begin our journey through the various titles in the Metal Slug library.
Okay.
The first in the franchise. Metal Slug Super Vehicle 001 is one of the easier games in the franchise. You play as Marco, and the second player takes over Tarma. The arsenal of the first game is rather limited, but each weapon is satisfying to use. We have the shotgun, heavy machine gun, rocket launcher, and flame shot. The enemy roster is mostly comprised of the rebel infantry. You got simple infantrymen, various manned vehicles like tanks, helicopters, planes, and bikes, and also various bosses who aren't that spectacular in the first Metal Slug. The franchise is known for its crazy set pieces and enemies, but the first game is rather reserved in its presentation. The stages are comprised of a jungle environment, various urban warfare settings, also a segment in the woods, and a snowy environment. You also meet Alan for the first time in Metal Slug, a character that acts like the arch nemesis of the Metal Slug squad. Alan also is immortal. Why? He's a family man. The final stage of Metal Slug consists of a rather long turret section on a military boat, and in the end, the final boss fight in which Marco faces off against General Molten for a final time. Metal Slug, like pretty much any other Metal Slug game later in the franchise, definitely is worth playing, especially when you want to play an arcade run and gun experience, which won't take too long to beat.
Okay.
Metal Slug 2 and Metal Slug X are essentially the same game. Let us take a look at Metal Slug 2 first. The second entry in the series already started becoming more ridiculous. There are 4 selectable players now: Marco, Tarma, and the new Aryan Theo. The character selection does matter a little bit, since the male characters run a tad bit faster than the female characters. This hidden mechanic was dropped in future games of the series. The arsenal of mass destruction has been slightly expanded, most notably armor-piercing grenades for the Metal Slug, Molotov cocktails, the laser gun, and the enemy chaser. This time, the squad will fight through an Arabian village, mummy-infested ruins, a brutal onslaught on a moving train, and a subway tunnel filled with Molten's experiments, and a big surprise at the end. You also meet Alan again. This time he gets eaten by an orca. Poor guy. This Metal Slug introduced a mechanic that I tremendously enjoy: transformations. If one of our heroes picks up too many food items, they become fat. The rotund versions of any character in general are slower and harbor a bigger hitbox. But this transformation comes with a significant upgrade. Weapons change. They become somewhat more effective by having bigger projectiles. Another transformation happens when a player gets attacked by a mummy. Mummies can transform a player character into a mummy as well. Yet, being a mummy is far less fun than becoming obese in this game. Mummies walk very slowly, jump clumsily, and can only wield pistols. Throwing grenades also is not fast enough to be really effective. If you get hit by a mummy's attack again, you will die for good. While on the topic, let's discuss mummies and some differences between Metal Slug 2 and Metal Slug X. Mummies come in 3 different varieties: the darker variants that exhume a mysterious gas, the lighter variants that vomit out rolling balls filled with the same mysterious substance, and finally, the green mummies, who cough out deadly insects. Metal Slug X changed the pyramid's haunted bowels quite a bit by adding mummified dogs. Those enemies are faster and deadlier. Normally, the player can simply duck under the toxic fumes certain mummies cough up, but dogs can hit you when crouching just fine. Speaking of changes, what exactly is different in Metal Slug X? Metal Slug 2 had performance issues. Significant performance issues. Being a graphically intensive game, arcade machines had a hard time processing the amount of things going on the screen at times. Metal Slug X rectified these issues and also changed the missions up quite a bit. A lot of people claim that Metal Slug X is harder than Metal Slug 2. In my experience, they are on par in terms of difficulty, but are different enough to be enjoyed separately. Bosses, for instance, quite a few stay the same, like the alien encounter in the final mission, with a mothership boss fight, or the pyramid level boss. But for instance, in the very first level, the gigantic bomber was replaced with a reused boss from the first Metal Slug. The bomber reappeared this time in the train level as a mid-level boss. Some other minor changes have been made all throughout the game as well, even changing how a level is played at parts. Even though both Metal Slug 2 and X reuse a lot of assets from a previous entry in the series, it is still remarkable how many exclusive enemies have been designed just to appear in a single level, like the mummies or Molten's experimental creatures. A trend that will be continued all throughout the series. The final mission of Metal Slug 2 and X is simply great. 1 or 2 of our heroes arrives at the enemy headquarters, fighting their way through hordes of rebels and aliens. Molten has teamed up with aliens to take over the world, but they double-cross him and try to take over the world themselves. For the first time in Metal Slug history, the Rebel Army and the Metal Slug gang team up to defeat a common enemy. And with that, we managed to beat Metal Slug 2.
Mission complete.
Okay.
The canonical end of the original Metal Slug story. Metal Slug 3 is a true endurance test for fans of the series. It not only is difficult, it does not even try to hide the fact that it wants your quarters on top of that. Nowadays, hearing of a third game in the series makes us shiver. We saw too many examples unfold before our eyes of third games that just butchered an amazing game completely. But this is not the case for Metal Slug 3. This game might be the peak of the entire series in terms of difficulty, length, sprite work, and gameplay innovation for a series that might have been at risk at becoming stale. Now there are branching paths, more slugs, more unique enemy designs, more absolutely insane bosses, and the most mind-blowing final mission in the entire series. The missions are extremely varied, introducing many cool bosses and features. Now our heroes can be turned into zombies, obtaining the incredibly powerful vomit attack that can clear an entire screen of enemies. Many new enemies like gigantic crustaceans, maggots, killer plants, underwater creatures, and way more. There are also new weapons like the Super Grenade and Iron Lizard. So, what is new with the bosses of Metal Slug 3? We have a giant enemy crab, extraterrestrials who crash landed on Earth, causing a zombie virus outbreak, a robot, a weird ship you fight atop a temple of sorts, and then the final mission of Metal Slug 3, which feels like an overtly long boss fight by itself. First, we find ourselves in a side-scroller bullet hell section, defeating the first mid-level boss, our arch-nemesis Alan. Then, we face off against General Molten in a similar setting, just like the first Metal Slug final battle. After defeating Molten, it turns out that he was an alien in disguise. The real Molten has been kidnapped by the extraterrestrial forces. The alien kidnaps the player, gets in a spaceship, and returns to the mothership. The rebel forces and the Metal Slug gang, for a second time in the series, team up together to send the common enemy back into space. After another scrolling bullet hell sequence in space rockets, which are able to wield special weapons, we get inside the mothership, in which we defeat the Bloodmother of the alien forces. We even get help from Alan himself, and manage to rescue Molten and our kidnapped squad member. Fighting our way through hordes of aliens, drones and clones of our kidnapped friend, we manage to escape the mothership and fall back down to Earth. This is the true final boss fight of Metal Slug 3, and after that, we have completed the third game in the series. What a thrill it was! It also harbors one of the most cathartic and satisfying ending cutscenes from the series, with the gang relaxing on the floating Metal Slug. One of them throwing a gun away to symbolize an era of peace ahead of them, and watching the gun descend into the murky depths of the ocean below. Metal Slug 3 is an epic conclusion to the series, but apparently not the end of all conflict on Earth, since we have 5 more games to cover.
Okay.
I will be very honest from the get-go. The 4th entry in the Metal Slug series is a rough ride. Metal Slug 3 was the last project SNK could work on before the company went bankrupt. During the bankruptcy, the company Playmore, which later went on to be called SNK Playmore, decided to pick the franchise up and move things along from there. Metal Slug 4 was developed on a shoestring budget by a different development studio who did not yet understand what made a good Metal Slug game. I can only describe this entry into the series as the most ghetto Metal Slug experience you can play right now. Except when you consider playing something like Metal Slug Allen, which you shouldn't. Metal Slug 4 is lacking in many regards. A lot of assets from earlier games have been reused and hacked together into Frankenstein-esque creations which, for one, do not look that good, and second, make the game feel like a Newgrounds fan game at points. Metal Slug 4 is not a bad game, but it is the worst Metal Slug game of the series for me. Not only because it does not look as good as other entries in the series. The game literally was hacked together by developing it on top of Metal Slug X, which could explain a few shortcomings. Metal Slug 4 features a squad of playable characters again. 2 of them we already know, and 2 more that are new to the series. Marco, Theo, Trevor, and Nadia. Marco and Eri still appear in Metal Slug 4 as background characters. While I dislike Metal Slug 4 gameplay-wise, I did like some design decisions. For instance, at the end of every mission, the player gets picked up by other members of the group and dropped off to new missions by those same characters. This brings a better sense of continuity to the table. Other than that, the crew has been incorporated into the game more, making them feel far more connected with each other. The arsenal was updated yet again. We now have access to the double machine guns. Other than that, we do not have many cool additions or changes. What is weird about Metal Slug 4 is that the stages themselves are much harder than the final bosses of every stage. What I really disliked is how long certain screens linger on one spot while hordes of enemies spawn from left, right and center. Literally. Metal Slug 4 is challenging, but it is not fun for me, since it felt unfair. All other Metal Slug games never felt unfair because the patterns of how enemies spawned into the scene were thought through, but that might just be my impression of the game. The boss fights are frankly a bit weird and also feel like a major step down from Metal Slug 1 to 3. In terms of transformations, the player can now turn into a monkey, which is pretty nice. In terms of stages, Metal Slug 4 mostly represents urban environments, and another level takes place on a ship.
Okay.
After the rather disappointing Metal Slug 4, Metal Slug 5 thankfully shows that SNK Playmore learned from their mistakes from the previous title. Metal Slug 5 might be one of my favorite titles in the series, with a completely new cast of enemies, ranging from a new army to defeat, to goofy Aztec jungle folk, to even an eldritch horror which invades Earth. Metal Slug 5 does not feature any new weapons. We still see heavy machine guns, drop shots and flame shots. We do get a new vehicle or two to command, but what is obvious from the get-go is that the main attraction of this game are the new enemies. The game is challenging, but unlike Metal Slug 3, 5 is much more accessible. This game feels on par with Metal Slug 2 and 3 to me, since it finally took the series into a different direction. Speaking of change, Metal Slug 5 implemented the slide mechanic. Our heroes can now slide on the ground as a quick maneuver to dodge bullets or advance quickly through levels, while crouching. It is an interesting mechanic that does not require another button. You push down on the joystick and press jump to initiate the slide. Although, we never saw the slide return in future games in the series. Why is that? In my experience, the slide was a nuisance during gameplay. One standard maneuver you are bound to do in many segments throughout the series is jump and shoot downwards to fend off attackers below. In Metal Slug 5, you're able to do this too, but if you are not careful with your inputs, you will end up sliding into your death on occasion. The slide also is extremely situational, and after the novelty wore off, I ended up not using this feature. Cool, it's there, but it maybe was for the better to leave it out in future titles. So many games. We are almost done. Metal Slug 6 is unlike any other title previously. The Metal Slug formula has been changed drastically. Metal Slug 6 is weird. For one, you have 6 characters to choose from now. Those characters being Marco, Tarma, Eri, Theo, and 2 new characters from the King of Fighters series, Clark and Ralph. Each character gets certain benefits others do not. And if you play on easy, you start off with a heavy machine gun immediately. The game allows you to switch between 2 different weapons, which is rather unusual for a Metal Slug game. Stages are good, but they possess an interesting difficulty curve. A few bosses are rather easy, some are really hard. The game starts off as easy, almost too easy. As the game progresses, it becomes slightly harder. And at the final mission, the game starts sending a player to hell. There are also new enemies. For instance, the Hunters and a new alien race which invades Earth. With those enemies we also get a new weapon, the Zaibatsu sword, which is a powerful short-range weapon which can even destroy projectiles. The new weapon and few new slugs aren't the only additions to the game. Metal Slug 6 also received an entire rework in regards of the soundtrack and sound effects. The game sounds different, but not so different that it would not fit into the series style. The game has some sound mixing issues though. Sometimes sounds seem to lack in the game. Thematically, the game feels a bit like a retelling of Metal Slug 3, with the rebel army teaming up with the aliens. Just so another race of aliens attacks humanity and enslaves the other aliens, so that the rebels and our heroes team up yet again. The theme of the rebels and allies coming together to defeat a common enemy was novel in 2. It was perfected in Metal Slug 3 because it frankly was unexpected. It happening again in 6 kinda lost its appeal to me. So, is Metal Slug 6 good? For sure. It's a bit odd as well.
Okay.
With the last entry into the mainline series, Metal Slug 7 or Double X does not only double down on the gameplay changes presented in Metal Slug 6, it simultaneously is the hardest game in the franchise. Metal Slug 7 originally released on the Nintendo DS. Double X is an enhanced version of 7, which released on the PSP, and later on even released on the PS4, Xbox One, and PC. I only have footage of Double X since the changes between games seem to be minimal. Some changes in sprite work here and there, more of the new sounds are present in the PSP version, and the PSP version also features Leona from the King of Fighters series, along with the rest of the team from Metal Slug 6. The music might also be the best in the entire series. Double X is hard, but it is not unfair. It comes in 3 different difficulty settings. I chose normal myself, and was challenged all throughout the game. This game needed the most continues for me to beat. 61 in fact. 61 continues to beat this game. Double X featured some more slugs, the Thundershot weapon, and a new form of rebel, the Future Rebel. The bosses are varied and unlike earlier titles from SNK Playmore, are brutally hard. Well, not all of them, but the ones that were hard involved a lot of tricky movement. Double X and Metal Slug 6 feel like titles specifically made for a console, which they kind of are. The gameplay changes do not feel out of place. The difficulty is high and the replay value equally so. To me, Double X is just as good as Metal Slug 5, 3 and 2, and easily takes the spot as one of the best PSP games ever made. I just would not recommend playing this game on an actual PSP though. And please, don't buy the Steam version of Metal Slug Double X. From what I have heard, it is a stinker. And the other .emu emulations aren't that good either. For Double X, I would recommend using PPSSPP, an emulator which will allow you to play the game with an arcade stick or another controller of choice, and you can make the game look prettier too.
Mission all over!
So those were Metal Slug 1 through 7. It is rare to experience a series of games that features such a consistent level of quality throughout the years. Not a single game in the mainline series is terrible, but I do have to pick some favorites. My ranking of my favorite Metal Slug games most likely looks like this: Metal Slug 3, Metal Slug 5, Metal Slug 7 or Double X, Metal Slug 2 or X, Metal Slug, Metal Slug 6, Metal Slug 4. It is really hard to choose a definite best game in the series. Honestly, most of those games are nigh identical in terms of entertainment value to me. Except Metal Slug 4, that game was torture. So, yeah, I had high expectations since my childhood, and as you might have noticed, those expectations were all met for the most part. Metal Slug as a series managed to one-up itself and evolve every time a new game came out. And what can I say about kids and video games? Sometimes kids play absolute trash. I'm just glad that this time I could prove that kid me had some good taste for once.